What if the most terrifying monster in your family tree wasn't a ghost or a legend, but a respected ancestor whose crimes were so perfectly hidden they shaped your family's fate for generations? Tonight, on Whispered Corner, we travel to the mist-shrouded hills of Colonial, Virginia, where 5 identical headstones beneath an ancient oak mark the site of a mystery so chilling even local historians refuse to speak of it. This is the true story of the Aldemore Kirsa, tale of wealth, power, and a father's deadly obsession with control. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Whispered Corner and ring that notification bell. Stories like this are rarely told, and you won't want to miss what we uncover next in the rolling hills of Henrico County, Virginia, where the morning mist clings to abandoned tobacco fields. There stands a cemetery that locals avoid. 5 identical headstones form a perfect line beneath a gnarled oak. Each bears the same surname. Each marks the death of a young man, each at the age of 21. The odds alone are chilling, but the real horror was only discovered in 1987, when courthouse renovations unearthed family records that revealed a household of 7 children who laughed, played, and planned their futures, never knowing their father was methodically eliminating every male heir the moment they could legally challenge his control. If you're already feeling a chill, hit that subscribe button for Whispered Corner, because the truth about the Aldemore family is about to get even darker. The Aldemore name first appeared in Virginia's colonial records in 1682, when Edmund Aldemore arrived from England. With enough silver to buy 1,500 acres along the Appomattox River, he built Ashwood Manor, a Georgian mansion that became the pride of Henrico County. Edmund married Constance Hartwell, a woman of sharp wit and Jamestown lineage, and together they raised 7 children, 5 sons and 2 daughters. Edmund seemed the model father, teaching his sons the business, encouraging his daughters' education, and running the estate with a firm but loving hand. But beneath the surface, Edmund's love was possessive, his need for control absolute. Virginia's inheritance laws meant that each son, upon turning 21, would gain legal rights to the estate rights Edmund could not revoke without public scandal. Ashwood Manor was a marvel of its time. The main house rose 3 stories above, manicured gardens, its imported brick facade glowing in the morning sun. Inside, mahogany paneling and crystal chandeliers spoke of wealth and ambition. But it was Edmund's studia, 2nd floor, sanctuary lined with ledgers and locked drawers that held the true secrets of the Aldemore legacy. Constance, Edmund's wife, was a force in her own right. She taught her daughters to read and write, encouraged her sons to think independently, and created a household where education and moral development were valued as highly as business success. The children grew up in a world of privilege, but also of expectation. Edmund, for all his apparent warmth, was a man who brooked no challenge to his authority. As his eldest son William approached 21, Edmund grew increasingly anxious. William was idealistic, questioning the treatment of slaves and dreaming of reform. On the morning of William's 21st birthday, Edmund asked him to inspect a supposedly damaged tobacco barn. Inside, William climbed a stack of barrels to check a support beam. As he called down his observations, Edmund methodically pushed the base barrels, causing the entire stack to collapse. William was crushed instantly, The death was ruled a tragic accident. But Thomas, the next eldest, noticed mud on Edmund's clothes, mud from behind the barn, not where the accident occurred. The first headstone was placed in the family plot. William Edmund Aldemore, 1686 to 1707. Age to 1. After William's death, Ashwood Manor changed. Laughter faded, replaced by a subtle anxiety. Constance retreated into prayer, and Thomas threw himself into the family business. But as Thomas neared 21, Edmund's behavior grew more secretive. The housekeeper, Martha Henley, noticed him making coded notes and conducting strange experiments around the property, weakening beams, modifying equipment, and keeping a locked journal on the eve of Thomas's 21st birthday. Edmund lured him away with a fabricated business trip, planning to stage a deadly highway robbery. But Martha and Dr. Marcus Fairfax, the family physician, had grown suspicious. They followed the pair, and when Edmund tried to shoot Thomas after his plan unraveled, Dr. Fairfax intervened. Edmund was captured, and his confession shocked the entire family. Back at Ashwood Manor, Dr. Fairfax revealed the truth. Edmund had murdered William and tried to kill Thomas, all to prevent his sons from inheriting. Edmund, unrepentant, calmly explained that he would have killed each son as they reached 21, and that he had set up backup plans, sabotaged equipment, hired accomplices, and coded instructions to ensure their deaths, even if he was gone. Martha and Dr. Fairfax found Edmund's journals filled with diagrams, psychological profiles, and murder plans for each son. The conspiracy was vast, involving unwitting servants, blacksmiths, and even local criminals. The race was on to dismantle every trap before James, Samuel, or Benjamin could fall victim. The search of Edmund's study revealed horrors that surpassed even Dr. Fairfax's darkest expectations. The coded journal was just the beginning. Hidden behind false panels and concealed in specially constructed compartments, they found an archive of murder that documented not only past crimes, but detailed plans for future ones. At each son's personality, physical capabilities, and potential vulnerabilities had been cataloged with scientific precision. Edmund had noted their daily routines, their favorite locations on the property, their relationships with other family members, and most chilling of all, their individual fears and weaknesses that could be exploited during their murders. William's file contained detailed architectural drawings of the tobacco barn where he died, complete with calculations about barrel weights, collapse patterns, and the precise positioning required to ensure fatal injuries. The margins were filled with observations about William's trusting nature and his tendency to follow his father's instructions without question, traits that had made him easy to manipulate into a deadly situation. Thomas's file was even more elaborate, documenting multiple potential scenarios for his elimination. The highway robbery plan had been just one option among many. Edmund had also considered staging a hunting accident, arranging a drowning during a fishing expedition, and even poisoning him with tobacco extracts that would appear to be accidental ingestion of processing chemicals. But the files for James, Samuel, and Benjamin were what made Dr. Fairfax's blood run cold. These weren't just murder plans. They were detailed psychological profiles that revealed Edmund's understanding of each child's character in ways that could only come from years of careful observation and manipulation. James, now 19, was described as intellectually curious, but physically reckless, most vulnerable to accidents involving mechanical devices or structural failures. The file contained sketches of modified farming equipment that could malfunction catastrophically, designs for weakened bridges that would collapse under specific weight loads, and plans for creating sinkholes that would appear to be natural geological phenomena. Samuel's file focused on his love of horses and his ambition to become involved in Virginia's emerging racing industry. Edmund had planned to stage a riding accident using drugged animals, sabotaged equipment, or deliberately created hazards along Samuel's favorite trails. The level of detail was horrifying. Edmund had even identified specific horses in their stable that could be trained to behave unpredictably under certain conditions. Benjamin's file was perhaps the most disturbing because it dealt with a child who was still only 15 years old. Edmund had noted his youngest son's fascination with firearms and his desire to participate in hunting expeditions with his older brothers. The planned accident involved modified gunpowder that would cause a rifle to explode when fired, creating injuries that would appear to be the result of defective ammunition rather than sabotage. But hidden within each file were references to secondary arrangements and backup protocols that confirmed Edmund's claims about preparations that would survive his capture. Dr. Fairfax found coded notations that appeared to reference other people, servants, business associates, or hired criminals who had been given specific instructions about carrying out murders if Edmund was unable to do so personally. The breakthrough came when Martha Henley recognized one of the coded names in the journals. Fletcher had appeared in multiple entries, always in connection with tasks that required someone outside the immediate family. Martha remembered that Jacob Fletcher, the drifter who had delivered false messages about dying relatives, had been seen on the property several times over the past 2 years, always in association with unexplained deliveries or mysterious projects that Edmund supervised personally.
Dr. Fairfax, Martha said urgently, I think Fletcher might be more than just a messenger. Some of these journal entries suggest he's been preparing backup plans for eliminating the boys if something happened to Master Edmund. The realization that Edmund's conspiracy involved outside accomplices transformed the situation from a family crisis into a manhunt that would require the resources of Colonial Virginia's entire law enforcement apparatus. Dr. Fairfax immediately dispatched riders to Richmond and Norfolk with descriptions of Fletcher and requests for assistance from colonial authorities. But Edmund, even in custody and facing inevitable execution, seemed confident that his arrangements would proceed as planned. You found my records, he said, when confronted with the evidence from his study, but you still don't understand the scope of what I've created. Fletcher is just one component of a larger system. Even if you capture him, there are others who have been given pieces of the plan, people who don't even know they're part of a conspiracy to commit murder. The interrogation that followed revealed Edmund's true genius for evil. Over the course of 27 years, he had gradually recruited a network of people who had been assigned seemingly innocent tasks that would combine to create lethal accidents. A blacksmith had been commissioned to create modified horseshoes that would cause animals to stumble at specific gates. A carpenter had been paid to install structural modifications in various buildings that would weaken them in precisely calculated ways. Even some of the household staff had unknowingly participated by following instructions about food preparation, equipment maintenance, and scheduling that were designed to place the Aldemore sons in vulnerable positions at crucial moments. Most of these people had no idea they were participating in murder plots. They had simply been told they were helping Edmund implement improvements to his property or business operations, but their accumulated efforts had created a web of potential death traps that could be activated through seemingly innocent triggers. The race, to identify and neutralize these threats, became a desperate investigation that involved dozens of people throughout Henrico County. Dr. Fairfax coordinated efforts to locate every person who had done work for Edmund over the past decade, while Constance and the older children worked to identify every modification or addition to the property that might conceal deadly surprises. But time was running out. James's 21st birthday was less than 2 years away, and if Edmund's backup plans were as sophisticated as his primary arrangements, the young man might already be in mortal danger from threats they hadn't yet discovered. The crisis reached its peak when Thomas, while helping to search the property for hidden dangers, made a discovery that revealed just how close Edmund's conspiracy had come to claiming another victim. In the stable where Samuel's horses were kept, Thomas found that several saddles had been modified with nearly invisible wire insertions that would cut through leather straps under the stress of rapid movement. The modifications were so subtle that they would never be noticed during routine inspection, but they would guarantee catastrophic failure during any extended riding session. Exactly the kind of accident that would seem tragically predictable for a young man known for his love of fast horses and risky riding. "My God," Thomas said as he showed the sabotaged equipment to Dr. Fairfax. "Samuel has been using these saddles for months. If he had decided to race his horse or take a long hunting trip, he would have died exactly the way Father planned." The discovery confirmed Edmund's claims about the scope of his preparations and demonstrated that his conspiracy was already active, waiting only for the right circumstances to claim its next victim. But it also provided Dr. Fairfax with the evidence he needed to convince colonial authorities that Edmund Aldemore represented a threat that required immediate and decisive action. The final confrontation with Edmund took place in the great hall of Ashwood Manor, with the entire family present to hear his ultimate confession and to witness the resolution of a nightmare that had terrorized them for years. Dr. Fairfax placed the sabotaged saddles, the modified equipment, and the coded journals on the table before Edmund, creating a display of evidence that made denial impossible. "Edmund," Dr. Fairfax said quietly, "we've found enough hidden weapons to kill your sons a dozen times over. The only question remaining is whether you're willing to help us find the rest, or whether you prefer to let your children live in fear of threats they might never see coming." Edmund's response revealed that even facing certain execution, his primary concern remained the preservation of his control over the family fortune. "Dr. Fairfax," he said with chilling calm, "you still don't understand what you're dealing with. I didn't create this system to satisfy some bloodthirsty desire for violence. I created it to preserve something valuable, a legacy that took decades to build and could be destroyed in a single generation by idealistic young men who don't understand the realities of maintaining wealth and power in colonial society." The confession that followed was both a justification of past murders and a detailed explanation of the conspiracy that threatened the surviving children. Edmund revealed the names of his accomplices, the locations of his hidden weapons, and the triggers that would activate his backup plans. But he did so not out of remorse for his crimes, but out of pride in the sophistication of his system and confidence that revealing its details would demonstrate the impossibility of truly stopping it. "You can arrest Fletcher and the others," Edmund said, as he provided information that would save his children's lives. "But you can't arrest the ideas that motivated my actions. Somewhere, sometime, another father will face the same choice I faced. Allow his life's work to be destroyed by ungrateful heirs, or take the measures necessary to preserve his legacy. When that happens, my methods will be remembered and improved upon." The systematic dismantling of Edmund's murder conspiracy took several weeks and involved authorities throughout colonial Virginia. Fletcher was captured attempting to flee to North Carolina, and his confession led to the arrest of several other conspirators who had been paid to carry out specific aspects of Edmund's plans. The modified equipment was removed from Ashwood Manor, the sabotaged buildings were repaired, and the network of potential accomplices was identified and neutralized. But the psychological damage to the Aldemore family would take much longer to heal. Edmund Aldemore was executed by hanging on October 15, 1709, exactly 6 months after his attempt to murder Thomas. The execution took place in Richmond before a crowd that included representatives from every prominent family in Tidewater, Virginia, serving as both punishment for his crimes and a warning to others who might consider similar solutions to inheritance. disputes. His final words, delivered from the gallows with the same calm authority that had characterized his business dealings, revealed the depths of his delusion about the righteousness of his actions. "I die knowing that I did everything possible to preserve the legacy I built for my family," he said. Addressing the crowd with no apparent awareness of the horror his words inspired. "If my sons choose to destroy that legacy through their naive idealism, the responsibility for the consequences will be theirs alone." The disposal of the Aldemore estate proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. Constance, as Edmund's widow, inherited everything by default, but the property carried with it the burden of blood money that had been built through slave labor and preserved through murder. Working with Dr. Fairfax and several progressive members of the Virginia colonial government, she made decisions that would transform the family's legacy from one of horror to one of redemption. The first and most significant change was the immediate emancipation of all slaves owned by the Aldemore family. More than 60 people were granted their freedom, provided with education and resources to establish independent lives, and given the option to remain on the property as paid workers if they chose to do so. The decision cost the family a fortune, but established a precedent that would influence other Virginia planters to reconsider their own relationships with slave labor. Martha Henley was granted her freedom and appointed as the estate's head of security, responsible for ensuring that no future threats could be directed against the remaining children. Her experience in recognizing the signs of Edmund's conspiracy made her uniquely qualified to identify potential dangers, and her devotion to the family's well-being provided the loyalty necessary for such a sensitive position. The Foundation, established with the bulk of the family's remaining wealth, became Colonial America's first organization dedicated to investigating suspicious deaths in prominent families and providing protection for individuals who might be targeted by inheritance-motivated violence. The Foundation's work documented dozens of cases throughout the colonies where family members had died under suspicious circumstances, and their investigations led to legal reforms that made it more difficult for future killers to use Edmund's methods. Thomas, permanently traumatized by his near-death experience and the knowledge of his father's true nature, chose never to marry or have children. He devoted his life to managing the Foundation's investigative work and developing legal protections for inheritance rights that would prevent future families from facing the terrors that had nearly destroyed his own. His work contributed to changes in Virginia law that required multiple witnesses for inheritance transfers and established penalties for coercion or violence related to family property disputes. James, Samuel, and Benjamin grew up knowing the truth about their father's intentions, a burden that shaped them into passionate advocates for family safety and legal reform. James became a lawyer specializing in inheritance law and family protection, while Samuel established Virginia's first organized system for investigating domestic violence. Benjamin, the youngest, chose a military career that took him far from Virginia, but allowed him to apply the lessons of his childhood to protecting other vulnerable people from family predators. Margaret and Catherine, though not directly threatened by their father's conspiracy, were profoundly affected by growing up in a household where murder was being planned and executed. Margaret became one of colonial America's first female advocates for women's legal rights, arguing that wives and daughters needed independent protections against violent family members. Catherine devoted her life to establishing schools and safe havens for children who had been threatened or abused by their own relatives. Constance lived until 1759, spending her final decades working to ensure that the Aldemore name would be remembered for its contributions to family safety rather than for the horrors Edmund had committed. She never remarried, claiming that her experience with Edmund had taught her that the capacity for evil could be hidden behind any facade of respectability and devotion. The physical evidence of Edmund's crimes was preserved by Dr. Fairfax and eventually donated to what would become the Virginia Historical Society. The coded journals, the modified weapons, and the detailed confessions were stored in a special collection that remained sealed for over 2 centuries, opened only to researchers studying the psychology of family violence and murder. Ashwood Manor itself was sold after Constance's death, and the property changed hands frequently over the following decades. Local legends claim the house was haunted by the spirits of Edmund's victims, but the detailed records maintained by the foundation suggest these stories were encouraged by property owners who wanted to discourage curious visitors from exploring areas where evidence of the crimes might still be discovered. The family cemetery behind Ashwood Manor tells the final chapter of this story in a way that reveals both the scope of Edmund's planned atrocities and the ultimate failure of his conspiracy. William's headstone stands alone among the family graves, marking the only son whose murder Edmund successfully completed. Beside it, 5 empty plots were prepared for Thomas, James, Samuel, Benjamin, and any future male heirs who might threaten the family fortune. Those plots remain empty today, serving as a permanent reminder of the lives that were saved by the courage of people who refused to accept that such systematic evil could be allowed to continue. Edmund's own grave lies apart from the family plot, marked only with his name and dates, a symbol of how completely his actions separated him from the people he claimed to love and protect. The case files compiled by Dr. Fairfax and the Foundation eventually became the foundation for some of America's earliest research into family annihilation and inheritance-motivated murder. Their work documented behavioral patterns that modern criminal psychologists still reference when investigating suspicious deaths in wealthy families, and their techniques for gathering evidence against powerful perpetrators influenced investigative methods that remain standard practice well into the 20th century. Modern historians studying the Aldemore case often focus on its implications for understanding domestic violence in colonial American society. The meticulous documentation provided by Dr. Fairfax and Martha Henley offers rare insight into how family murders were planned and executed in an era when forensic science was non-existent and legal protections for family members were minimal. Their work demonstrates that domestic violence in colonial America was far more sophisticated and widespread than traditional historical accounts have suggested. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Aldemore case is the question it raises about the nature of evil itself and the vulnerability of families to predators who hide behind masks of love and protection. Edmund Aldemore was not a madman or a monster in the traditional sense. He was a rational, calculating individual who murdered his own children for comprehensible, if morally reprehensible reasons. His crimes were motivated not by hatred or sadism, but by an obsessive need to control his legacy and protect his vision of family success. This ordinariness of evil, this banality of carefully planned domestic murder, made the Aldemore case particularly disturbing to colonial American society. It suggested that the greatest threats to family safety might come not from external dangers like Indian raids or criminal strangers, but from within the supposedly sacred bonds of blood and marriage. The idea that a father could systematically plan to murder multiple children while maintaining his position as a respected community leader challenged fundamental assumptions about patriarchal authority and family loyalty that formed the foundation of colonial social structure. The psychological profile that emerges from Edmund's own writings and recorded confessions provides valuable insight into the mindset of family annihilators, individuals who kill multiple family members to achieve specific goals related to control, inheritance, or social status. His combination of narcissistic personality traits, meticulous planning abilities, and complete lack of empathy for his victims matches patterns that criminal psychologists continue to observe in similar cases today. What makes the Aldemore case particularly significant is not just the scope of Edmund's crimes, but the systematic nature of his planning and the way he integrated murder into the normal operations of his household. He didn't kill in moments of rage or passion. He planned each death for years, involving other people in his conspiracy without their knowledge, and creating backup systems that would ensure his goals were achieved, even if his primary methods failed. The fact that his conspiracy was ultimately discovered and dismantled provides hope that even the most sophisticated family predators can be stopped if people are willing to recognize warning signs and take action to protect vulnerable family members. But the case also demonstrates how difficult it can be to identify such threats when they come from people who are supposed to be protectors rather than predators. What do you think of this story? Do you believe that all of Edmund's conspirators were identified and captured? Or might there have been additional accomplices who escaped justice and continued his work in other families? The documentation suggests that his influence on inheritance-motivated murder might have extended far beyond his immediate family, possibly inspiring similar crimes throughout colonial America and beyond. Leave your comment below and share your theories about what other secrets might be buried in the records of early American families. If you enjoyed this tale of colonial American crime and want more horror stories rooted in historical fact, subscribe to Whispered Corner and hit the notification bell. Share this video with someone who appreciates dark mysteries from America's past, and join us next time as we explore another case where the line between historical fact and unspeakable horror becomes impossibly thin. Until then, remember, the most terrifying monsters are often the ones who hide behind masks of respectability and family devotion, and that the greatest threats to our safety may come from the very people we trust most completely.